How's everybody? Good afternoon to you all. So Dr. Phil has a lot to get through, so we're scheduled to start maybe 2 minutes later, but I'm going to give you 2 minutes extra instead. It's beautiful to have you all here and those online as well. My name is Siobhan Brown, and I'm one of the board members of the Belfast Charitable Society and one of the directors of Clifton House Centre here. And I'm particularly interested in the subject, obviously being Black woman, but I also have the most Irish name. And my maiden name, Dr. Phil, is also Bonner.
Really?
Bonner. I confused a lot of people when I moved here before I got married, called Siobhan Bonner. So I had a lot of people spinning in the room looking for and I said, it isn't me, it is I. And I've yet to trace my Irish ancestry, so I'm really particularly interested in this subject. So it's my pleasure to introduce this talk this afternoon entitled Beyond the Pale, Black Lives and Hidden Histories in Ireland. And it's my pleasure to welcome our speaker, Dr. Phil Mullen, who will uncover the long and largely unknown history of Black people in Ireland from mythology and prehistory to Viking times and the 20th century. So in Clifton House, we have some notable Black figures who are associated with our history. In 1791, abolitionist Oluda Aquilano visited Belfast and was invited to speak at the poorhouse by the Belfast Charitable Society. Aquilano's visit was part of his work to advocate for the abolition of slavery, and his attendance at the poorhouse highlighted the growing anti-slavery sentiment in the city. So whilst delving recently into the archives, we uncovered a request made by Reverend Garrett, who was a visiting African-American teacher in the 1830s to give a lecture to the children of the poorhouse. And unfortunately, it was not recorded in the minute books if Reverend Garrett was given the opportunity to speak to them. After Frederick Douglass' visits to Belfast in 1845 and 1846, whose name most of you will be very familiar with, several ladies, including our very own Mary Ann McCracken, were inspired to establish the Belfast Ladies Anti-Slavery Association to render the situation of the slave more generally understood and to inspire others to stand with the abolitionist movement. In August 1830, William John Brown, a formerly enslaved Black man from Virginia, appeared before the Belfast Police Court accompanied by Quakers. After earning his freedom and settling in Baltimore with his wife and 5 children, he was kidnapped by slave traders in 1826 and sold back into slavery in New Orleans. Forced to load cotton onto ships, Brown escaped by hiding inside a bale of cotton on the brig Planter, bound for Belfast. Discovered upon arrival, he was aided by local Quakers who vouched for his freedom. The magistrate declared him a free man. Brown later worked in Belfast, but died in 1831 and was buried in Clifton Street Cemetery, which is managed here at the Belfast Charitable Society. His wife and children were still enslaved in America. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of the stories we've uncovered so far, and we are currently doing more research to find more stories of people of different ethnicities who came to the poorhouse looking for help. It's a bit of a background to what we're going to hear, and I am very excited. But just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. For those of you in the room, there are no, I like this part because I get to do things like this. Door is here. There are no planned fire alarms today, so if one does happen to go off, run. Orderly. So, but please evacuate immediately, and Clifton House staff will assist you. Bathrooms, turn right, and when you leave the boardroom, and if you could all switch off your mobile phones and devices to silence. For those online, everyone will be muted at the start of the talk. Please ensure that you remain muted throughout so that we can minimize disruption. Please ensure that your camera is switched off, and you can use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions, which will be answered at the end of the talk. For the best viewing experience, we recommend using the speaker view on your Zoom settings. So finally, to introduce our speaker, Dr. Phil Mullen. Dr. Phil is Assistant Professor Coordinator of Black Studies and Deputy Director of the MPhil in Gender, Race and Conflict, Department of Sociology at Trinity College Dublin. She's a member of the African Scholars Association of Ireland and the UNIDPAD Steering Committee for the Decade of People of African Descent, 2015 to 2024. Additionally, she was appointed to the National Advisory Committee on the Restitution and Reparation of Cultural Heritage and is a board member of Skene Press. Wow. Her research currently focuses on Africans and people of African descent in Ireland using Black studies and decolonial perspectives to move the concept of being Black in Ireland beyond the migratory lens to embrace a more in-depth analysis of what historical strands and intercommunal framing of what it means to be Black in 21st century Ireland. So now it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Phil to the podium to tell us more about the Black lives whose histories were hidden in Irish history. Dr. Phil.
Thank you. Morning or good afternoon, I think it is now. And thank you very much. I want to thank the Charitable Trust for their invitation to speak here today. If it's not too much information, I'll tell you that I was conceived in Belfast. And so, yes, this almost feels like a circular kind of moment, coming home somewhere. So I have framed this talk more as a lecture than as a talk, because what I'm going to talk about today is a history that is not established. It's not a settled history. It's a contexted history. It's the history that is only being written. And so a lot of history that you may think you know may be revised in some ways. And I'm going to start at the very start. And I'm going to bring you on a journey, hopefully, right into the present. Okay? So some of it might feel a little bit rushed because I have 40 slides. So I don't think I'll get through them all. But certainly I'm going to set my watch for 45 minutes because I can ramble. And then when my watch goes off, I'll stop and we'll, from wherever we were at, we can take questions and have a discussion. Is that okay with everybody? So I want to start, like I say, at the very beginning. Okay, so this is our overview. So I want to start at the very beginning here. So 10,000 years ago, the very first people in Ireland, I don't know if any of you saw the programme during COVID, during lockdown. RTE had a programme called The Burren. And in that programme, it was discussed about how the very, very first people in Ireland, 10,000 years ago, were dark-skinned with blue eyes. So a little bit like the man in the picture here. And this matches very, very much with the Cheddar Man, who was found in Cheddar Gorge in 1903. And when they were able to reconstruct him, they saw that actually he was a dark-skinned man. Okay, so this obviously, let's say, threw the cat among the pigeons for many people, but not just in the UK. We have here in Ireland itself, in Ballynahassee, where the Ballynahassee woman found in Belfast was also discovered when they deconstructed her DNA that she was from what they call the Near East or the Middle East. So we're talking Syria, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, any of those places. So we've gone from the Mesolithic hunter-gatherer. We're now at the era of Newgrange. So our first people in Ireland were brown-skinned, blue-eyed. Our second people in Ireland were brown-skinned, brown-eyed. Okay, so, and we have the scientific evidence for that. The Swedes only recently have also discovered that their very first people were brown people, which has really upset them. And we also have only in August of this year, where two skeletons were discovered in the UK to have sub-Saharan African ancestry. So up to now, people have been okay because it might be North African, it might be Anatolian. But now we have in the 7th century in the UK, DNA analysis which showed 20 to 40% of sub-Saharan, in fact, Nigerian, Yoruba DNA in the 7th century in the UK, which means these skeletons must have had a grandparent who was of African, of Yoruba ancestry. So it throws off all of the traditional narratives around migration and what the migration patterns were at the time. So this is just the start for us. If we go to Dublin, that little black and white picture is called Wormwood Gate, but it was originally known as Gormond Gate. And Gormond is kind of a mythical figure who was an African king who was said to have invaded Ireland with 160,000 African soldiers. And that once he had subdued the Irish, he then went to the UK. And this is written in Geoffrey and Monmouth's The History of, what is it? The History of England. Yeah, the history of the kings of Britain. So Geoffrey, this is part of mytho-history, okay? And again, it's a contested history. But then we also have here what's called the Beach of the Manaw Gurm, or the Beach of the Black Women. So when we look at mytho-history, maybe it's actually telling us something that's been forgotten. So in County Waterford in Ireland, there is a beach called Trá na Mná Gurm. So in Gaeilge, Gurm means black. So back in the day, Gurm could mean green for grass, could mean blue for the sky. It could also mean black for black people. And one of the reasons that people were called Gurm is because the Irish word for black is dove. But if you called somebody a Manaw dove or a far dove, it meant the devil. So I was a Colleen Gurm in school, but if I'd been a Colleen dove, I would have been a Satan's child, okay, or a Satan girl of Satan. So this whole idea of Gurm and having a beach called Manaw Gurm kind of throws up again, well, why? Why do we have a beach called the Beach of the Black Women? And the road to the beach is called Trá na Mná, Bóthar na Mná Gurm, which is the road of the blue women. So it ties us into, again, what is the mytho-history that has maybe brought this into our kind of mythology in Ireland. So does it kind of give us this idea that Blackness was in existence? So one of the things we can look to are the Vikings. The Vikings were raiders. They traded with North Africa. They were also the biggest slavers in their time. And so they would have gone to North Africa and they would have brought people back. And they brought people back from sub-Saharan Africa. So in the annals of the fragmentary annals of Ireland, which are little fragments that are left of old history, it tells us that the Vikings went to Mauritania and they brought back Black people. And they say those Black people stayed for many years, okay? So when we say they brought back Black people, we're not talking about 10 people. We're talking about shiploads of people, hundreds and hundreds of people that could be sold into slavery. And some of them may have been, others may have gone into the Irish community and mingled at some point. So all of our mythology may be hidden up in something that we haven't really been taught in school or has been forgotten. And there's lots of forgotten histories and what we call hidden histories as well. So this is really important stuff for us to try and deconstruct. How does this happen? How do we get a name like this if there were never any Black people in Ireland? Why would somebody bother to call a beach the beach of the Black women? And how and why was it called the beach of the Black women? So again, this is work that we have to do. And I've been on to the Irish language people and the people who, I can't remember their name right now, but they're the people who know every name place in Ireland, and they've never come across this. So I've had to show them on the map and introduce them to Bill Hart's work because it was Bill who found this. And so we're now in a dialogue around this. So they might be able to throw up some answers to this for me. So if we look at other signposts of Blackness in Ireland, again, we're talking early, very early aspects. If we look to 1324, we see that Dame Alice Kittler in Ireland from Kilkenny was considered to be a witch, and she was considered to take the form of a cat or to engage in terms of a cat or a shaggy dog. And it was also said that she had had sex with an Ethiop. Okay, Ethiop was the word, you might come across it in Shakespeare. It's the word that's used for Black man. Okay, so it's not about whether we think she did or she didn't. It's about the fact that there is a concept of Blackness in Ireland in 1324. So we're not coming new to this concept in later centuries. It's already here. And she's already being kind of denigrated for her behavior. So I'm not a historian, I'm a sociologist. So what I need to do is to theorize how people are understood in the context in which they live. So this idea of Blackness and Blackness on the island is a very important concept, the fact that it even existed, okay? And again, that it's not new. And we can jump up again to 1578, again, Kilkenny, where we see a man referred to as a blackamoor and two witches who are hanged. They're executed for being considered to be involved again in some kind of witchcraft. So again, 1578, we see this concept of Black presence on the island. Here is a Black man who has been treated exactly the same as all of the rest of the poor. He's been hanged along with two other women, or executed along with two other women. So again, that concept of the existence of Blackness on the island is really important. This is much more important to me, again, and this is the work of Bill Hart. And I, when I was in philosophy, they used to say that everything that's been written is a footnote to Plato. So I would say everything I'm doing is a footnote to the work that Bill Hart has done. And Bill spent several years, well, multiple years in the archives trying to work out when and if there were large numbers of Black people in Ireland. And so he trawled through the newspapers, he trawled through parish records, through baptisms, all of the places where you would imagine this information would be found for the 18th century. And what he discovered from all of the references was that we had possibly a population, he estimated, of between 2,000 and 3,000 people on the island of Ireland in the 18th century. And you can see from the map where they were concentrated. So obviously Dublin had the largest concentration of people, but they spread out as far as Kerry, few found over in the west, and up as far as Donegal. And we could say maybe, well, is he overestimating? Is he imagining? But we have this Freeman's Journal article, this comment in the Freeman's Journal article in 1777, where the journalist or the writer says that a female blackened child was so closely pressed by the multitude of people crowding round and staring at her. Had she in any manner differed from others of her colour and country so common to meet with, it might have been some apology to gratify curiosity. That not being the case, it reflects both scandal and ignorance on the company. So what he's telling us is, why are you staring at a black woman when they're everywhere? Why are you doing this? Why do you feel it necessary? She's not a curiosity. These people are so common to meet with. So this is in Stephen's Green in Dublin in 1777. So again, this ties into the evidence that we're building, because again, when you have a contested history, everything is about interpretation and how you build the evidence. So this is part of the evidence for this presence of Black people on the island, let's say prior to the Celtic Tiger. And this may be one of those people we have here, who is, I've called the 18th century Beyonce. So Rachel Baptiste, born in 1737, she made her debut in 1850 at the age of 13. And on her debut, she was referred to as a native of Ireland. But we see here later another reference to her as a native of Africa and also a real Black woman. And she sang all over Ireland. She became known as the Black Siren. She was very, very famous. She was said to have been a magnificent singer. And then she also toured in the UK. She toured in Liverpool, in Blackpool, all around, down to Brighton, everywhere. And she came back to Ireland and is thought to have married a man called Mr. Crowe. And Mr. Crowe was also believed to have been Black as well. So again, we have what we call these unicorns. Unicorn is something that's only spotted, maybe sometimes thought of not to really exist, but there she is. We also have people, as you've mentioned, Equiano and Frederick Douglass. Equiano, we know, came to Ireland, but he didn't just lecture about anti-slavery. He also married an Irish woman. I think she was called Susan Cullen or Susanna Cullen, is that right? And they had children. Eventually, they went to the UK. We have Frederick Douglass, who came to Ireland, spent months here. And his famous line, lo, I breathe, the chattel becomes a man, which is a very famous expression of how he felt the Irish welcomed him into Ireland. However, we would also have to say that he did experience racism in Ireland, and he did experience pushback. And there's a story of where an actor called Bateman was doing minstrelsy and blackface in Ireland. And Douglass actually complained about this and said, this is really unacceptable. And he got pushed back from the Limerick Defender, I think it was called. And they said, so what? Africans, Black people are totally inferior. We really don't care. We're going along with our blackface because we like it, we enjoy it. So it's not like he had it all his own way when he was here. He still had to deal with people and people's attitudes to Blackness. And because of our, I suppose, abolitionist stances that Ireland was very much in general anti or pro-abolition, that we tend to think we were different, that we didn't do the things that the Brits did. And anything that we can do to disassociate ourselves from the British, we tend to do, I should say, in the South. In the South. But this is Sarah Bartman. And Sarah Bartman was taken from South Africa. She was a Khoi woman. She had an unusual anatomy. She had what's called stygiporia, which meant she had a very large backside. So she was taken as a kind of a freak show from South Africa. She was brought to Britain, where she was put into a cage, and then she was exhibited around Britain. She was eventually taken to Paris, and exhibited there as well. But during her time in Britain, there's a story that says she came to Limerick, and that while she was in Limerick, nobody came to visit her. Okay. And this is taken as a reference to, I suppose, the Irish respect for her, or maybe their sensibilities around oppression. But the rest of the story is that actually she was brought to Dublin, and she was in Dublin for 3 months, and she was there, and there were packed houses. So she was exhibited in Grafton Street and on other houses around Dame Street, and it was packed out. And she tended to be poked and prodded, and women, eventually the bustle is said to come from Sarah Barton. Okay. Yes. And so women, you can see the woman, when she died, her genitals were cut out and put on display. Her body was stuffed and was put into a French museum. And it was only with the intervention of Nelson Mandela in 2000 that she was brought back to South Africa and buried. So she had died in 1815 at the age of 26. So obviously that type of a life that she had, it said she may have been alcoholic by the age of 26. So yeah, so Ireland again, in terms of blackness and black bodies, wasn't really any different to anywhere else, or how they understood blackness, or how they treated us and perceived us. But if we look away from these unicorns, there were also ordinary people living their lives in Ireland. And one example, and there are multiple examples, is John Sutto. And John Sutto was a black man, a survivor of a shipwreck in Dunany. And we see from the newspaper account that he married an Irish woman called Margaret O'Brien. And they married before a vast crowd of people, and the press reported there was a very elegant supper, and the bride and bridegroom seemed as happy as possible and are now enjoying all the benefits of married life. So it's a case of nothing to see here. It's just a black man getting married to a white woman. What's interesting is in the newspaper report is that it says Margaret inveigled, having heard that he wanted to marry a white woman, inveigled herself to get herself introduced to him. And nobody seems to have been obsessed by this, and they're now enjoying the comforts of married life. And there are multiple little newspaper clips like this. There's another newspaper clip from around the same period of a couple who give birth, the woman gives birth to twins, one black, one white, in the 1700s. So again, this is going on. And if you think about it, through slavery, ships stop at Cork, people jump ships, they go into the interior and are often taken in by the Irish, and are often just, they just begin to blend in into the Irish society. But here's, for me, the big news. The big news is around the numbers, like Bill said. How many are there? So it's not just one here and one there. Bill went to the US Census because Ireland didn't keep those kind of racial records, because people weren't racialized in the same way that they are in America. So it wasn't as easy to find people in the records. So Bill made this huge leap and said, I'll go and look and see if any black people ever emigrated from Ireland. And so what he found in the US Census, as you can see, are this number up to 1,694 who emigrated between 1850 all the way up to 1920. And we see there's a year missing. 1890 is missing. So those records seem to have disappeared or been destroyed in some way. So the numbers could be higher. But this is not something that we generally tend to think about, is we know Irish people emigrated. We don't tend to think of them as black people, or that there were any black people who emigrated from Ireland during this period. But this is Bill's work. And again, like I say, we're still building the evidence. So we still have to find, if we can, these people. But as Siobhan said, she already has given us evidence of somebody who went to America, was enslaved, and came back. So that's one we'll tick off the list, and I'll be back to Siobhan about them again. but we do see that there is this backwards and forwards between Ireland. And it also kind of it cuts out the narrative that Ireland is out here in the northwest, static, nothing happening, no one comes, but everybody leaves. Well, what we're really seeing is that Ireland is just at the center of everything, like everybody else. There is a lot of movement in and out and in and out. We know St. Brendan's Voyage from school, and we know St. Patrick, and we know, so there is this movement across seas and people coming across. And you know about Baltimore and Cork, where Baltimore and Cork is sacked by the Muslim pirates and the people are taken back to North Africa. So your Claddagh Ring was actually designed by a man who was taken away by these, enslaved by these pirates, brought to North Africa, is trained as a goldsmith, eventually comes back to Ireland and designs the Claddagh Ring. So is that Claddagh Ring a traditional Irish design, or is it something he learned in North Africa? Again, we probably will never know. But this is a really interesting point, and this is something that we really need to address, because again, like I say, I'm a sociologist. So finding people for me is not enough. I'm not a historian. I want to make meaning out of what I find. What does it mean to have been Black? What does it mean to have emigrated to the US? Why, if you're Black and you're free, would you go to America where they have slavery? It doesn't make sense to me. Why did these people go? What was the push or pull factor for these people to go to America as Black people? And so this is one of the census records that Bill found. And if you look down the margin where you have the B, B is for Black. So remember, on arrival in America, everybody is racialized immediately. You're put into a category, you're either white, you're Black, or you're mulatto. So the white and the mulatto is a little bit difficult because the M and the W are very similar. So we're not always sure about that, but we're sure certainly about the Black. And we see here that Daniel Carroll, age 41, who was a waiter, where was he born? Ireland. Where were his parents born? Ireland. Where were his grandparents born? Ireland. Okay. Annie, Black, 37, wife, she works in the laundry. Where was she born? Ireland. Where were her parents born? Ireland. Where were her grandparents born? Ireland. That's 3 generations of Black people in Ireland. Now, Bill is not sure which of the census records this belongs to, but we can still see in the 1800s that Black people have emigrated. And we see their children there were born in Massachusetts. Where were the parents from Ireland? Where were the grandparents from Ireland? So that kind of fits with this idea of emigration amongst Black groups. And if we need further evidence, if that's not enough for us, then we can go to the American newspapers and see, well, do these people turn up in the American newspapers? Well, yes, they do. And here we have a story of a Black man called Andrew Tobias, known as an Irish Negro living in New York. And the judge says, you got to be kidding me. Are you telling me this guy is Irish? And he says, do I see a coloured Irishman? And Andrew says, I was born in County Cavan, as was my father and grandfather before me. Okay. This is newspaper reporting from 1884 in New York. And again, we see 2 other records, one from September 1854, again, a Negro jet black from St. Louis, was believed to be a runaway or a vagrant, turns out to be a free Irish emigrant who was born in Waterford County, Old Ireland, and his brogue is said to be of the richest sort. Then we have Joseph Persons, again born in Ireland, took out his naturalization papers, and he was naturalized in the Superior Court in 1880. So this is all part of our evidence, that we're putting together to show that being Black in Ireland is not something new. It didn't come with the Celtic Tiger, okay? That there has been this presence over and over on the island. and not always in small numbers. We also see that not only were people emigrating to America, but some were emigrating from America to Ireland. So here we have this couple who got married. He's a Black professor of Greek language and literature, and she's the daughter of a white reverend. So following their marriage in Ireland in 1853, they moved to Ireland because of the racism that they were experiencing. So obviously, having heard from the abolitionists, they thought Ireland was the ideal place to come to. But he couldn't make a living, so eventually they moved on to the UK. But again, we see these push and pull factors backwards and forwards between Ireland and the US. And I should say, with the figures going to America, what we have to keep in mind is those figures only tell us who went to America. It doesn't tell us who went to Britain, who went to Canada, who went to Australia, who went to South Africa, or anywhere else in the world. They're only the figures for America. So we don't know, in terms of emigration, how many other people left to go to other places. So this again is called the Mixed Museum of Ireland, our Mixed Museum. And it's a museum online. So it's only an online museum. And it looks at the people who were from mixed relationships who lived in Britain. But this page is a special page. It's called an exhibition page. And we got it because we have so many people who emigrated from Ireland to UK who were of mixed ancestry. And actually, I should have taken out at the start this book that was published last year that I brought for you to have a look at. It's called Irish People of Colour. And it's very substantial, to say the least. So when we talk about Black people in Ireland, there is evidence of people being enslaved on the island. So we see newspaper reports where people have put in a little advertisement saying, a young Negro boy run away. He is the property of Mr. So-and-so. If you hire him, he will take action. Or a woman who came back, an Irish woman who came back from America, who brought back with her a Negro girl, aged 13, speaks good English, can be sold or set out for work. So we know that slavery is operating on the island of Ireland, but not everybody who is here is enslaved. There are a lot of people who are here who are entertainers, who are just domestic servants, and just ordinary people working and living their lives and getting on with their lives. We have Pablo Paddington from Cork, who was a circus entertainer, and he was extremely famous. Went to the UK, very, very famous. So we've all these people who are of mixed heritage who moved from Ireland to Britain for work and I suppose to just make different lives as everybody else does. There are also people who are identified as Black in the record who are not. So Mir Aulud Ali is somebody who's often referred to as Black, but actually he's Indian. And he was appointed professor of Arabic in 1861 and became known as the Mir. And, you know, circulated in high society, was very well thought of, and he married an Irish woman as well. And we also have Saki-Dean Muhammad, and he eloped with Jane Daly and married Jane and had a son called Arthur. And Dean actually went on again, and again, these are Muslim men, okay? Both of them are Muslim men. And he went on, they moved to the UK eventually, and he opened up the very first Indian restaurant in the UK, and you can see he got a plaque there in Marylebone in London. So when we talk about preserving memory and memories that kind of just go through our society, go through our communities, we don't really know why we know things, or we have sayings, we don't necessarily know why. And here we have an example when we jump up to the 20th century of Joyce's Ulysses. And then he has a character called Sissy Caffrey. And he refers to Sissy with her gollywog curls and her mouth. So where is he getting that from? Why is he describing a young Dublin girl in those terms? And again, we can only ask, is this some kind of atavistic gene that was there in Dublin, that was around? Maybe she was somebody who came over, we don't know. But it's the fact that Joyce is describing somebody in Ulysses in these terms in 1920, or in the 1920s. So I think this is really important, because here we have a young man called Anthony Ekundayo Lennon. I don't know if you know him or if you've heard of him. Anthony's parents are from Drimnagh in County Dublin. His grandparents were from Drimnagh in County Dublin. But both he and his brother were born looking black. And Anthony lives in the UK. He's an artistic director. He's involved in theatre and all of that. And about 10 years ago, maybe, he was involved in this big scandal because he was accused of being a fake, like Rachel Dolezal, okay? And that he had taken a grant that was meant for people from ethnic minorities. And so Anthony has had DNA testing done that shows that he has this kind of recessive African gene that has obviously, and you see him and his brother both there, and his parents there were white. But one of his parents, and I think he said it was on his father's side, had an African gene. So again, we see this showing up in people now, in the present, which I think is also interesting and speaks to our history. So if we move from the south to the north, we see this place called Blackskull. And Blackskull, I don't know if any of you know it, it's just outside Newry. It's believed to have its origins based on the beheading of either an enslaved or a recently freed man. And again, that's something we'll probably interrogate a lot more as we go into the history. You also have Black Joe. Do you know Black Joe? Joseph Wilson. Joseph, as you can see, was born in 1836 in Newry. And he was known in Belfast as Black Joe. He came from very modest beginnings. He became a rate collector, property owner, and a commissioner for affidavits. And Joe was involved in a big scandal where somebody tried to take out life insurance on him when he was already dying. And so it made all big newspaper headlines about Joe. But he was very well known, a well-known character in Belfast. Then we also have George Henry Thompson. And George was identified as an American, Black American with a wife and child in Belfast. And he was arrested during a wrecking spree on Crimea Street. So he was apparently leading a Protestant mob, waving a stick and shouting, "Come on, ye sons of William." So in the reports, it says that actually he was being egged on. But while he was being egged on, he was also being racially abused and being called Sambo, and all of this type of language as well. And people who reported on it said actually he was being pushed into this. But at his trial, again, we can see his position as a Black person is very tenuous. He's still in a white world, regardless of whether people are egging him on or he's seen as part of the community. He's still in a very tenuous position. This idea of him being mocked as an Ethiopian orange man or an Othello in the newspaper, again tells you that when you begin to meet the public or you become public facing, then your race suddenly becomes a characteristic of who you are. This is probably one of the people I like the most. It's Louis Lachaz. Louis was operating in the north of Ireland for many years. He was selling medicines without a license in 1938 and was arrested for that. He then was arrested again for distributing abortion pills in Dublin. And then he was arrested again in 1943 on a serious charge where this Reverend Robert John Skelton had commissioned him or asked him to help him to get an abortion for this girl that he'd gotten pregnant. And in the end, there's a lot of toing and froing and who is really responsible and whether Skelton, was fully understanding of what it meant or what he was doing. And Lascelles, what was his role in it. At the end of the day, everybody gets off except Lascelles, and Lascelles is sent to jail. And so what we see again is that when it comes down to it, maybe race isn't always in your favor, okay? Since everybody else is let go. And the Reverend is seen as maybe a bit of a holy fool, maybe didn't really understand what he was doing. So yeah. But Lascelles becomes immortalized in T.H. White's novel, The Godstone and the Blackamoor, and he's the titular character, James Montgomery Majorbites. And T.H. White actually met Lascelles, and he said that he was a very lonely character, very stoic, but very alone in the world. And so, yeah, again, we see him, we come to know him through this behavior, and yes, he's very much on his own in this white society. And so when the rubber hits the road, he's very much on his own. Again, if we come forward to the 1940s, I presume you all know about the GI soldiers who were stationed in the north. And so the numbers are anything up to 12,000 black GIs in Ireland. And there's a woman called Mary Beckett who wrote a story called Teresa. And it's a fictional story about a black soldier who gets a girl, Teresa, pregnant. And it's her story of raising the child, because then the GIs are gone. And I suppose I have a special kind of affinity to this story because it's set in Belfast. My mother was in Belfast, she got pregnant in Belfast, and her name is Teresa. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. But again, there was this mixing within the north with the black soldiers, and they tried to stop them from mixing. I presume you know all this. They tried to segregate them, keep them away. Particularly, they weren't supposed to go to dances, local dances, and the white GIs refused to go to the same dances as they did. And on some nights in the pubs, there had to be a black night and a white night for the GIs. And obviously, the people of Belfast said, we don't want anything to do with your nonsense. And they just mixed freely with the GIs. And in fact, said they were much more polite than the white GIs. And again, you have your very first colonial students. So like my father came as a colonial student. So Prince Adedoyin came, the very first student in Queen's University in Belfast, qualified in medicine in 1949. Was on the British team for the Olympics. But you see here, he married Hannah Hosaba-Dory, who had actually grown up in Belfast. So again, it gives us a sense of this long presence of a small community, but certainly one that was there already in Belfast. And again, that brings us up to Tim Brannigan. I don't know if you've heard of Tim. Tim was born, his mother pretended she had him, she put him into an institution. Then a year later, under devious means, she adopted him back. So nobody knew that he was hers. But he grew up on the nationalist side, got involved in the IRA, ended up in jail and all of that stuff. And he's written his book, Where Are You Really From? But what's interesting is that on the other side of the tracks is this little girl who grew up in a Protestant household. And she has written about her experiences of growing up on the Protestant side as a racialized and black child growing up in Belfast. And we also just see that racialized aspect. I haven't really talked about racism, but there is racism throughout the island. And so this poor woman died running away from thugs in Belfast. And again, this is something that is prevalent throughout the history of blackness on the island, but has become much more prevalent in recent years. And that brings me to me and my people who are the mixed race children. of colonial students who were born in Ireland. Jude there in the jumper was born in 1941, so he's 84 years of age. So when people tell him there were no black people on the island of Ireland before the Celtic Tiger, he kind of looks at them quizzically. But again, most of us whose fathers were colonial students in the 60s grew up in institutions. But it's always been considered that, well, there weren't really that many. But when we had the Mother and Baby Home report that came out in 2021, in just 2 institutions, there had been 275 children. And that was out of the 18 that were investigated. And that doesn't cover the hundreds that were there. So when I used to go home to my mother, she lived in Dunleary in Dublin, and I would stand at her gate sometimes just watching people going up and down the road. And there were 3 black girls who used to go down the road, sisters, and further down the road there were 2 other black girls. So on one road in Dunleary there were 6 black children. So it kind of gives a sense of the numbers mainly that were there, invisible, visible, hyper visible at times, but mainly invisible, because people would tell me there are no black people in Ireland. So you in Belfast, I suppose, to bookend the talk, I would just say that there's a lot of work going on in Belfast. There's been a recent exhibition about the history of Blackness in Belfast, which I think is great. And I think, as it says, it's an untold Black history, and all of the history is untold. But yeah, it's a history that's emerging. And this, I don't know if any of you have come across this book, The Confessions of Pontius O'Toole. It's set in Belfast. And what it is, it's a story about how the British are conspiring to send all of the black people in Britain to Northern Ireland to deal with the colour problem in Northern Ireland. So a lot of it is Belfast slang. It's a bit hard for me to read, but it's a very interesting book. And also, again, it's about making meaning of why would you think it's okay to take black people from the UK and put them into Northern Ireland? What does that say about Northern Ireland and how it's positioned within the UK? And what does it say about black people in the UK and their positions there? And Afro Hirsch has written that book called British, and she came and discussed it in the North. And she said it's the only place she went to on her book tour where she didn't actually have to explain the idea of identity. So I guess we're all caught up in that. So again, that's that book that I showed you. And there we are.